Welcome to the Payment Shed podcast, the weekly podcast that dives into the big topics, trends, and people shaping the worlds of payments, fintech, and business leadership, with your two co-hosts, myself, Grant Evans, and Justin Hanna.
Welcome back to the Payment Shed podcast. Today we are joined by Dan Owens, Chief Strategy Officer at Oceanpayment. Dan, welcome to the Payment Shed.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Please, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career in payments, and what you're doing at Oceanpayment currently?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose my career in payments is probably a little bit different to most. I entered at mid-30s, actually. I spent between 15 and 16 years in non-payments, in financial services, but very traditional. Started in insurance as an insurance broker. So heavily regulated market. In Ireland, in Dublin, when I started, and quite boring actually when I look back at it now. But I think fundamentally it gave me the foundations. One, working in a regulated market, but also dealing with B2B. You know, ultimately as a broker, you were there to deal with businesses and solve complex challenges. And then in 2015, 2016. I entered the payments world, having done 5 years previous with a tax technology business, and I suppose that was my entrance into the Fintech landscape, and dealing with a lot of Fortune 500s, dealing globally with businesses. And I joined the PaySafe Group, where I worked for 3 years as a director of sales, and I suppose that's where my career started. I did a couple of stints at a few startups, worked with a European and UK acquirer here in London before making the move to Hong Kong this time last year, just coming up on my anniversary, where I joined Oceanpayment as Chief Strategy Officer.
So big professional and personal shift. Obviously you've got a young family, so how have you found that transition going from Europe over to Asia? Yeah,
so I suppose a little bit daunting to begin with. You know, we thought long and hard about it. Our kids are 9, 6 and 3, so if we were going to make an international move, I think the time was right to do so. My wife was offered a move with her employer. She works for a US investment bank, and it just seemed like the right time. So yeah, a little bit daunting, particularly for me, because the payment landscape is, of course, very different in Hong Kong. You know, things over the last few years have changed significantly, where a lot of Hong Kong businesses are focusing towards mainland China, and a lot of the global fintechs have moved to Singapore, and I think this was post-COVID actually. So a lot of the expat community would have either moved to Singapore or actually went back home, or to other areas post-COVID. So it was a little bit daunting, but looking back now, I think it was a fantastic move, both professionally and personally.
And how have you found the kind of business world differs out there in terms of speed, structure, decision making? Has that been a big difference for you?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you know, prior to moving, when I knew we were going, I did a lot of, as you do, a lot of research. You know, how is it going to be different? And you know, when I moved, I didn't know what type of business I was going to join. Is it going to be a Hong Kong business? Would it be a Western business with a Hong Kong office? Would it be you know, a Singapore business with a Hong Kong office? And you know, in the end, I've joined a global organization which has deep roots in mainland China, in Shenzhen, with Hong Kong and Singapore licenses. And actually, it's a real melting pot, because what we do is we get this global approach. You know, we have within the organization, we have about 350 people that sit within Shenzhen. Our merchants are typically coming from mainland China, with entities all over the world, often entities within Hong Kong or Singapore, but international entities. So when we look at how our merchants behave, but also how Oceanpayment behaves as a PSP, it's not hugely different, but some of the nuances are decision making you mentioned there. In the West, my experience, particularly within fintech, has been that, you know, over the years it changed. Everybody gets involved in a decision at all levels. And that's often why things don't get done, right? And you guys will know, you've probably worked in some of these businesses where everyone has an opinion. And in a way that can be good. Everybody has a bit of input. But sometimes people have an opinion, but they haven't almost earned that right to have an opinion because they've either entered a business or maybe they don't have enough experience or enough knowledge. So it creates a lot of noise. In China, you don't really get that. There's definitely a hierarchy. The leaders of the business will make the decisions because they have the experience. And ultimately, it sits squarely with them to make that decision. I think there's more of an acknowledgement than there is, particularly in Western fintech, where certainly at a lower level in a business, where people maybe have only been with a company a year or two, maybe quite new to their careers, they may not be on board with decisions. So there's a bit of a churn. People maybe don't, are not fully committed. What I've seen in China, both within fintech, but also with our merchants, decisions are made. There's context given, and everybody's on board, and they action those decisions, and work just gets done. The speed at which work gets done is 10x compared to the West. Once that decision is made, come hell or high water, the milestone will be hit. So it's a different culture in terms of the speed. Also, there's an acknowledgement within Chinese businesses, I think, that if you get something wrong, it's okay. You just go again. You keep going until you find a solution. There's no embarrassment. Okay, we made a mistake here. Okay, fine. Don't worry. There's a calmness. And I think that's something I'm enjoying. Not every decision we make at Oceanpayment is a correct one. We might say, let's go down this route. Let's check something out. Let's look at this partner that might fit within our ecosystem. We'll trial it. If it doesn't work, fine. And we move and we iterate. And I think a lot of businesses talk about operating that way, but not a lot of them actually execute and action those decisions and set themselves up to be, we're agile, and if it doesn't work, we'll move. Ultimately, in the West, somebody takes the blame, right? That's my experience.
And talk to us a little bit more kind of on Oceanpayment as a business. Great to understand a little bit more about them.
Yeah, so Oceanpayment is a global PSP licensed in Hong Kong and Singapore. We're in the process of obtaining our Luxembourg license, which is coming shortly as well. In Asia, we operate in Hong Kong and Singapore as a payment facilitator and have been doing so since 2015, so 10 years as a PayFac. The company is very much structured as a PayFac. We've got a large risk and compliance team. We've got, I think over 40 people between chargeback management, onboarding, risk and compliance, KYC, etc. We operate about 500 different APMs, and I will come back to the term APMs, and I'm using that now, but hold that thought. Asia is heavily, local payment method driven, but of course, right across Europe, our merchants are Chinese background, so they're selling everywhere, right? Selling across 200 different businesses. We also issue, so we launched our issuing business in April of this year. A soft launch, and we're extending that now. So we operate under our own Hong Kong BIN. We issue MasterCard virtual cards. We do a lot within the travel industry. So we work with some large airlines in APAC as well. So we've seen obviously a need and a demand from OTAs looking to work with us from a virtual card perspective. And as an organization, we are very much a global business rooted in China, Hong Kong and Singapore licenses. As I said, Luxembourg coming, but our USP is we're bridging the gap between Chinese background merchants and the West. And that's right across US, Middle East, LATAM and Europe.
And when we talk about fintechs in Europe and the US, it's mostly startups or disruptors, right? When we talk about fintechs in China and in APAC, it's more kind of around infrastructure and that integration. How do you think that changes the way that Oceanpayment works in regards to having that global footprint? You mentioned that it's work with Oceanpayment to expand to the rest of the world. How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, so interestingly, if we take something like airlines, for example, if you look at the airline industry in Europe, it's dominated by legacy platforms, right? So you've got your Sabres and your Amadeus and these systems, very similar to like the insurance industry in the UK, large legacy platforms. In Asia, because of the deep talent pool from a tech and an AI perspective, a lot of our merchants will own their own tech stacks and build their own tech stacks and will be less reliant on platforms. So that's a noticeable difference that we see. But of course, when we're trying to bridge that gap and they open an entity in the UK or in Germany or France, and they build our website to target European consumers, it's very different. You could go on a website in China, and we've all been there. It's perception. You'll go on to this website and you'll say, I'm not quite sure about this website. There's a lot of colors, there's a lot of pop-ups. And actually, if you go to China and even in Hong Kong, that's how e-commerce is driven. They're the expectations of the consumers. That doesn't translate to Europe. So us as a PSP, we're more than just providing cross-border payments. We're advising. So making sure they're working with the right acquirers, making sure that they understand how to position themselves as merchants. So it's very much an advisory as well as being a PSP.
So over a decade as a PayFac in market, would you say, because I always look at the US and think they're kind of a little bit more advanced or they've been doing it for longer than us. Is it the same sort of flavour in APAC as far as the PayFac ecosystem is concerned?
Yeah, I think probably not as mature as the US. But again, I think Oceanpayment is probably not typical in Asia. We're quite unique. I think, as I said earlier, we're like a melting pot of everything. We take the best of each jurisdiction, and we almost dissect what are others doing in different markets, and we bring that internally and we restructure it and we model it. So absolutely, the US is more advanced. Things like merchant of record, PayFac, but from an Oceanpayment perspective, I think we're probably one of the most advanced when it comes to payment facilitation.
And do you think with some of you talk about the AI innovation and those product-led teams, do you think things move a little bit quicker in the APAC market as far as integrations, merchant setup, or the growth of businesses that are using payments as a big enabler?
Yeah, absolutely. Speed is just it's kind of hard to explain until you go there, right? There's two things that personally I you think until you enter a new country. Scale and speed, like nothing you've ever seen before, and the speed is driven by understanding what the problem is and never stopping until you find that solution. And I think that's certainly our ethos at Oceanpayment is we solve problems, we solve them quickly, and I also think the risk appetite. Companies in Asia will take more risk from a corporate or a commercial perspective, less worried about, if this fails, well, we just go again. And again, it's that sense of calmness, right? We try it, and certainly in the last year, I've seen many merchants, many partners, and us as a business try things. They fail, we try again, but ultimately we still reach that end goal or that milestone faster than a Western business, churning it over,
Is there also like an element then with the regulators and how they operate out there, and governments generally have been, and I might be wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure like with Singapore, the government have an investment in nets and things like that. So the government's more invested in that fintech payments infrastructure?
Perhaps. I don't think... I think maybe to a certain extent, and you have a point with Singapore. But I think it's less around regulation, to be honest. I think it's more around. I think it's just the culture to be able to move quickly, succeed, not dwell, and go again. One of the things I noticed certainly in Asia is you don't dwell on your success and high five each other and you celebrate. You just you'll acknowledge it. You'll celebrate it, but you'll quickly move on to the next. And I think that's it. It's almost a relentless growth. And
Dan's walking out with a cake after the big
well,
deal. And they're like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm waiting for a high five, and everybody's already moved on. But I think that's that's the fantastic thing. Like, this is the most enjoyable role I've had in my entire career. It's the most busy I've been. I'm flat out, but it's exciting, and you move on. Right, you get something done, and it's on to the next. But it's healthy. It's growth, as I said, at scale and at speed, and it's a phenomenal environment to be in, and it's something that I've just been relishing over the last 12 months.
An ex-colleague of mine said, and she's based in Singapore. She said to me, sometimes the businesses in the West, we get in our own way to try and get good things done. And we don't get out of the way to try and get rid of the bad things.
Yes.
So you mentioned it, but we dwell on things that went wrong for so long. And then when there's something that's exciting that we may want to build, too many people are involved in it that by the time we want to take it to market, it's already behind where it needs to be.
100%. And so this goes back to what I said about, like, you talked at the start about the culture is that there are too many people involved. In my experience in fintechs in the West, everybody has an opinion, and to a certain extent, it's okay to socialize ideas, but not everybody's opinion is valid, and that's just business, right? And I think we certainly, what I find, particularly within the UK fintech space, is there's a lot of voices, and then what happens is there's a paralysis. So, like you say, something doesn't succeed, and then it's dissecting it, drains up. Why did that not work? Well, we don't want to take that risk again. In Asia, certainly in China, didn't work. Okay, why didn't it work? Let's try again. Let's go again, and go quickly. What? Because actually, it's the fear maybe of failing again. But then you're paralyzed, and then you're not going to succeed. So now you've spent all this time trying something, and then you just sit on it for months, and then sometimes you never try it again, and then a competitor comes in, tries it, learns from your mistakes, or does it a bit quicker. So I agree. I think that's definitely a cultural difference.
It probably shows though, right, when you think about the APMs or LPMs that have been based out in Asia when it comes to WeChat Pay, Alipay, for example. I mean, trying to roll out one new payment method in the UK and Europe takes years and years and years. Yeah. And because people are so scared of not doing it right. And we've attempted it with open banking. Wero's coming in now. I'm sure that hopefully will be successful in rolling that out. But the role of the super apps in the East has been incredible, right?
It's hard to imagine until you're based out in, and really Hong Kong has a Alipay Hong Kong and has a WeChat Hong Kong. When you go to mainland China, I remember my first trip to our office in Shenzhen, and I got into a taxi, and I hadn't even downloaded the WeChat Hong Kong because it was relatively new to Hong Kong. I got in, I took out money, right? And I took out so much money that I still have yen sitting in my wallet. I was like, I don't know how much things are going to be. Let me just get a load of cash. But the taxi driver just, he took the cash. Fine. But of course, they've got the barcodes and he's expecting me to scan. And I put my hand and he kind of looks at me and he's like, okay, this guy's a tourist. Fine. Everybody's lives are within, particularly if you look at WeChat and Alipay. And I mean, like, if you were to take WeChat and Alipay away from somebody in mainland China, it'd be like just taking your phone away completely. I mean, everything is there. You've got all these little mini programs, taxis, travel, you can get your food ordered. When I travel on the metro in Shenzhen, I use a QR code. So there's one where I can pay for my coffee on Alipay, and then I flick to another one, which is a transport QR code. And I just scan it going in, going out. That's it,
It's the dream, really, isn't it? It's what we work towards here. We always talk like absolutely. Everything lives within I mean, ID and everything lives in your phone out there, right? But in terms of like those digital micro journeys of payments, they've been doing it for so long. And I always look at stuff in the UK. I lived in a town in Yorkshire called Ilkley, and the council, this is the point when you had like Ringo and everything were rife, right? They were well established.
Yeah.
And the council clearly went for the cheap option and were like, we're going to put brand new, this is something we're going to do once in the next 20 years. We're going to put coin first meters throughout the town.
Coin first.
And then,
first.
you know, belatedly 6 months later, they realised it was awful and you had stickers put all over the side of them. They're like, you should have just gone. But you could have done it in a much neater way, right? You're not thinking about the future. Maybe we obsess over, and you know, this might sound really harsh, but you're thinking about the 1% and not the 99% quite often, right? And that's maybe the UK and European markets overthinking probably, this sounds so bad, equality and access to legacy payment methods. I'm not saying you can't use those payment methods, but we think there first sometimes rather than where do we need to be going.
Yeah, you know, I agree. But, you know, like you have to look at Kenya, right, with M-Pesa as well, right? It's the same thing, right? You know, certain regions in Africa where like the average number of mobile phones is between 3 and 4 per person, right? So it's, I mean, in Kenya, we're way ahead in terms of mobile money. So I do certainly think the UK has a lot of catching up to do, but, you know, particularly as a card dominated market, you know, when we're referring to, you know, Apple Pay and Google Pay as alternative methods, you know, these wallets. I mean, it's just your
you wouldn't
card.
believe how many people
you know?
that have been on this show since we've been doing it have alluded to the fact that cards days are numbered, or we should be getting rid of physical cards, and you've got network tokens now. Like, how much longer are you going to need a physical card, really? It's a real question.
Yeah, and I wonder is like the rise of stablecoin also, and just blockchain in general, going to drive some of that change, right? Where everything is a token, right? You mentioned like identity, payment, like, or a single token, just everything,
well,
right?
The US have just rolled out tokenized passports in a digital wallet, right?
Mm-hmm. So I do think that's the way it's going. I think it will definitely take time, but I do think that retailers, airlines as well, are looking to Asia as a prime example of how to create these super apps, where ultimately a customer lands in a super app and everything is there. Their entire lives sit within an app. And it's completely different.
Does it become confusing? I know it's different for you probably as a Westerner going into that market, but is there just, and George, when he was in Japan, sent us an image of like a noodle shop, and it had like 30 payment methods in the window on this big like sheet sticker. It's like, what do I use? Right?
Yeah, I think certainly in China, it'll be mostly, particularly for things like coffee shops or small restaurants and that, like that's where really WeChat Pay is used. It's like almost, I think, like 99% coverage. And use Alipay as well, don't get me wrong. But you never take out your card. So when you just scan a QR code, you don't even think. You don't have to think. So it's not confusing. I think some of those stickers as well are quite outdated, right? You'll see them in taxis, but again, you can say the same thing for many e-commerce sites that you see now.
Stickers,
Maestro stickers, right? Exactly.
So look, we've spoken about kind of how business is being run. What about when it comes to selling, I want to say, across countries, right? And we all know in payments, it's not one size fits all at all. Are you having to kind of have a different approach the way you try to win business, both internally and externally?
Yeah, so I think Oceanpayment is unique. So our merchants are, the relationships we build with them are not just about we'll process your payments for this region. It's about understanding who the merchant is. And this is not just for enterprise, this is also for our SMBs. Understanding what are your goals, where are you selling to? And for Chinese merchants, it's where are we not selling to, right? Everywhere. Where their customers are willing to buy our products, we'll sell, we'll ship. We've got the logistics, we've got the infrastructure set up. So for us, it's about understanding the business. It's very much a relationship base. It's built on trust. And when I moved to Oceanpayment, our CEO Lanny said to me, this is going to be a challenge for you because it's a new culture. And I was like ready to take it on. And she said, in China, trust is built on delivering results, doing what you say you're going to do, right? And again, in the West, you can talk about building trust, but it's once you show that you can be trusted and you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver, then you've got a solid relationship. How we work with our merchants is we build that trust, right? If we say we're going to do something, we do it. We do it at speed. We do it at scale. Then they entrust us. Then we advise them. What markets are you going into? Are you thinking of opening a European entity, a US entity, a Middle Eastern entity? Okay, how can we support you? Here's what we know. Here's what we've done for other merchants. And that type of sale, you'll hear a consultative sale, right? But in payments, that approach is often saved for your large enterprises, right? Nobody wants to put that effort in. But I think it's very different from an Oceanpayment perspective. We treat all of our merchants, regardless of size, with that same consultative approach because we know the sheer scale, the potential for every single merchant we work with to scale globally. And even the SMBs will be selling in 200 countries, right? In the UK, if you've got an SMB, typically they'll sell maybe domestically, maybe to a couple of European countries. In China, you could have an SMB that says, I'm doing maybe like $500,000 a month. You're an SMB, but there's 200 countries. So the approach has to be the same. You still have to give them that same care, wrap your arms around them. So I think that's probably one of the main differences on the approach to kind of the difference of approach to Western merchants.
Today's episode is sponsored by ISX Financial. Most growing businesses end up stitching together multiple providers to run their payments and banking, leaving them exposed to cash flow, reconciliation, and even security issues. ISX Financial delivers a unified ecosystem with multi-currency accounts, online payments, real-time UK and EU transfers, and global mass payout. Within that platform, Paid By provides pay by bank with real-time settlement notifications, automated reconciliation, and integrated refund management. One partner, one integration, helping your business transact with confidence. You can learn more at isx.financial. That's isx.financial. And a big thank you to the team at ISX for supporting the show.
I think the sales strategy is a bit cleaner though when you talk about like that decision maker autonomy that exists, right? So here there's always as commercial leaders we're going, well, who is the decision maker in this particular business type or organization? And it could be the CEO here, it could be the CTO, it can be the finance director, whatever it might be. You almost need to just get that one person that is going to be the decision maker in your world, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes there will be one or two, but you're right. There's less gatekeepers, put it that way, right? So you kind of have Joan in finance who's been working there for 20 years and maybe has no real understanding of payments or can't. No matter how many times you do a demo or explain to her, she has no idea. And then it's lost in translation, and then it goes back up to the CFO, and he thinks, "Oh, no, we don't have time for this," or it's not much of a cost saving, or it goes to the CTO, and he thinks, it's too much hassle. That's 500 days of dev work because Joan has explained that we're going to have to rip out the entire system when actually it's like a WooCommerce plugin, right? So absolutely, I think
Joan.
Poor Joan. And if your name is Joan and you're watching, I apologize. But so I do think that it's a little bit more simplistic. However, merchants in China are demanding and they're very much price driven as well. So there's probably a balance of
that's universal.
So there's a balance. But I think it's probably correct that decision making process and that hierarchy is probably beneficial to doing business. Yeah.
Good. Look, you mentioned there kind of around showing capability, then that kind of earns you the respect and the reliability moving forward. What happens when that doesn't go the way you want it to go? if it's happened so far.
Yeah, well, luckily it hasn't happened, which is probably down again to how we operate as a business, right? Because you keep going until you reach that success, and you do it quickly. But I suppose there's always a risk when dealing with merchants that you'll lose some trust, and it's a competitive market, right? So what we're also seeing is, and one of the threats to any Asian-based PSP is Western acquirers coming in, obtaining licenses in Hong Kong and Singapore, putting a couple of people maybe on the ground. But of course, they have the name, they have the brand, they have the acquiring licenses throughout the West. And sometimes there's a challenge of those acquirers or PSPs pulling some business away. What we often see is merchants come back because the difference of well, they don't know how to serve us. They haven't met our expectations. Yeah, they were able to drive a price down, and we're able to get local acquiring rails in the UK and Europe, but actually they don't understand us. They don't understand us as a business. They don't understand how we work, how we communicate, etc. So I think it's incumbent on any payment provider to not let your standards drop, no matter how well you're doing, how successful you are, how what your margins are like. You've always got to have in the back of your mind that at any moment somebody could swoop in and take all of your merchants away, right? So I think that's how we operate at Oceanpayment, that we don't let our standards drop.
And we talk about fintechs and payment companies here. Obviously, a lot of them are looking at APAC. India's getting a lot of chat, right? Obviously, because the volumes are so significant in some of these markets, right? Is there any advice that you would give to those brands, I guess, coming into these markets, but also you, on the flip side, I don't know what the strategy is. I'm sure you do as Chief Strategy Officer for Oceanpayment. Are you looking the other way as well and thinking, you don't need to just have the success in 1, 2, 3 regions. Like, this is a product that we can take global, or certainly into more markets.
Yeah. So on the first question, advice I would give is understand the market you're entering, right? Asia is a huge, huge market, and each country has their own ways of working, different cultures, different expectations. I think Europe, to a certain extent, has a little bit of that, but there's you could probably cover a good handful of European countries with a similar strategy. Let's put it that way. I think within Asia, there are far more nuances. What I would say to any PSP or acquirer looking to come into to Asia and not just to come in and obtain some of the volume from Chinese customers, which everybody's been trying to do for years. Make sure you understand the market and who the players are within the fintech ecosystem. Come and speak to companies like Oceanpayment. Pick up the phone, drop a message to me, ask, here's what we're trying to achieve. I think sometimes within the payments world, it's a competitive landscape, right? But actually the most success, if you look at in the last 10 or 15 years, the success comes from collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we shouldn't be fearful of saying we don't really know exactly. We know what we want to do, but there's a few areas we need help with, because there's money to be made for all fintechs in different areas. Sometimes there's crossover, sometimes there's conflict of interest, but that's the payments world, right? It's incestuous. It's so I would say understand the market and understand who can help you.
There's been a bit of a scramble in Japan recently, obviously, with them, dishing out some new acquiring licenses, right? New entrants into the market, and I think they've all gone a little bit gung-ho into Japan, right? We're probably, again, not understanding some of those.
I assume SoftBank are probably a little bit nervous right now, right?
Correct. And I think that's the worst thing you can do, is just to jump into a market, right? Because sometimes you don't get really a second chance. First impressions are important. In terms of our own strategy and the other way, for the last 10 plus years, we have been accessing local rails on behalf of our merchants, partnering with acquirers and other PSPs right throughout the UK, Europe, Middle East, US, LATAM, and we will continue to do that. As I said, we're working on our own license in Luxembourg, which will we've got an office already that we're about to launch in the next couple of months. So that will mean that we can kind of lay some roots there. But our strategy, I think, will always align with our USP, which is working with merchants that come from a Chinese background and helping them operate globally, right? Rather than, we kind of course have the ability to work with kind of merchants within a domestic market within Europe, but it's quite a saturated market, as you know. Our USP is the language capability, the fact that we're based in China, the fact that we're deeply rooted in China, and of course it's a massive market, and we're seeing more and more Chinese merchants now scale to a stage where they will open local businesses.
It's such a clever play because you've built that reliability and that trust. So you put that solution or license on the ground in the European markets, but what you're saying is, I presume obviously your biggest customers are the ones that you'll have moving into European markets primarily, but you're allowing them to grow and scale with you with their trusted payment partner, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that is our USP. We are bridging the gap between China and the rest of the world.
And how then would Oceanpayment navigate the regulators in these countries, right? Because you mentioned that you guys are doing all the hard work on behalf of your merchants. How are you then having these relationships with all these different other providers globally?
Yeah, so for us, there's two elements to this. One is perception, right? I spoke to somebody last month actually at an event, and a comment was made around particular models we were discussing, just general discussions around various different models and different models that were being operated in Asia. And so it was the chief risk officer of a European acquirer, and he said, it's always still that kind of view of China. And I said, do you remember this was the exact same view that Western acquirers had of Eastern Europe? Do you remember those days? Now, look at where all the acquiring licenses are.
Yeah, definitely.
Eastern Europe.
All the crypto platforms are being built out.
Yeah.
But that's because there was a bit of friction, right? You talked about those friction points and us tripping ourselves up with regulation and worrying too much.
Yeah.
In Eastern Europe, they did that. Like, okay, some of it was a little bit gung-ho when you look
true.
at Lithuania and what have you, but they've scaled that back now, but it allowed them to create a whole new market.
Yeah.
And now, they've increased the scrutiny and what it takes to get a Lithuanian license, but that is now an established market, right?
Absolutely. And so, we work very closely with the regulators. We've worked so hard over the last 10, 11 years to build a reputation as actually one of the only PSPs that don't touch any high risk MCCs. Airlines, from a credit risk perspective, is the highest that we would touch. We don't do any adult, we don't do any gambling, we don't do any forex, we don't do any crypto, we don't touch pharmaceuticals. So that, which is quite rare, right, for Asian-based PSPs, right? There's higher margins, but we are squeaky clean from an MCC perspective, and that has been hard fought, right, to build a reputation against certain perception, right? So when we go and we support our merchants in Western markets, we speak with acquirers and we partner with the right acquirers who actually understand us as a business, how we manage risk, what our fraud tools are. We've built a lot of our in-house fraud tools, real-time transaction monitoring, post-transaction monitoring. One of the things we've built that I'd love to take to market is actually a connection into all of the global logistics software. So, we operate as a PayFac in Hong Kong. So you can imagine Chinese merchants selling cross-border. Of course, fulfillment times sometimes can be impacted by extreme weather, right? Hong Kong, China, lots of typhoons, and that could add 3, 4, 5 days, right, to a delivery time. We're plugged into logistics software. So we say to our merchants, okay, well, we know what your fulfillment times are. We may have a rolling reserve in place, but we know based on the data, they have to upload their logistics data. we've got a plug in. We can do a lookup to say, yes, you have delivered these 100 packages to these 100 customers, or in fact, you've only delivered 50 of them. We can then release funds for the ones that are delivered. So that all that data then gives us a better picture of peaks and troughs in terms of like where the chargeback risks are, the ratios. We can then go to acquirers with that data, and they understand, okay, well, Oceanpayment are really on top of this. And it's about building that trust. So I think the challenges we have with global regulators, same as any PSP, you know, regardless of where you're based, you're going to deal with international regulators entering new markets. So we communicate. I think that's the best way. We communicate. We keep our ear to the ground. We speak to regulators. We work with the right acquirers as well. Yeah. Because it's important for us that we not only that we maintain and retain our image as a PSP that does the right things, but that you also work with the right partners, right? Because it only takes one partner that maybe doesn't do the right things that can damage reputations. So we've got a fairly stringent onboarding process and an evaluation criteria as well for ecosystem partners.
Is it challenging maintaining multiple PayFac acquiring relationships as a business?
Is it challenging? Sometimes. But I think
share of wallet and different risk requirements.
Their needs from you as opposed to your needs from them.
Well, I mean, I think that with any partnership, right, there's a bit of give and take. I think for us, we're growing all the time. We've got good, significant volumes that all of our partners are pretty happy with what they're getting. I think that's a benefit. And then if you look at our growth trajectory for this year, again, there's significant growth right across all acquirers. So everybody's getting their fair wallet share. So I think it's, again, we're quite selective. So it's when we choose a partner, it's about, is this long term? And if it is long term, they understand what we're doing as a business, and we are aligned in terms of our kind of growth plans and trajectory.
And do you see the same sort of things we see in, you know, America and Europe in terms of like, and are you doing this yourselves internally as well, but getting better authorization rates from different underlying acquirers, and how are you dynamically routing that traffic? Have you built out those flows and data sets to manage that?
Yeah. So we've been dynamically routing for years, actually. It was one of the first things I asked when I came in. You know, do we have the ability? Yes, we have the ability. Are we doing it? Yes, it's tried and tested. We're doing it. We have been doing it. It's so important, particularly for our merchants. Price sensitive, and they want to maximize auth rates, right? It's something that's working well for us. We don't call ourselves like an orchestration layer, right? Because you probably need to plug into other PSPs to be an orchestration layer, but we're orchestrating those flows to the right acquirers.
That's a really good way of putting it as well, because you do see a lot of gateways that were a gateway and say the parents orchestration layer, and they're not. They're a gateway that's connected to 15 acquirers, and maybe they're optimizing their acquirers. Correct. But you also have to optimize your payment gateway just as much as you do your acquirers, right?
Absolutely, right. And that's the reason why you have, you know, multiple acquirers plugged in. You know, I've worked for companies in the past that were acquirers and then operated their own gateway, but they had no other acquirers plugged in, and that was a difficult sell to go to a merchant to say, we want to take your volumes, and they'd say, well, I'm plugged into, you know, Opeo, or I'm plugged into, you know, whoever, and I've got like a choice of 7 acquirers, and you try to win that business saying, yeah, but we own our full stack, and they're thinking, well, what happens if something goes wrong with you? Who do I go to?
I'll be more concerned about your gateway being the payer than the 7 acquirers on the other side.
That's true. It's true.
And okay, so when we're looking then, I guess, as well at some of the lessons that merchants can take from, we've talked a lot about the acquirers across these different regions. You're obviously now moving into new markets with merchants. What do the merchants need to be thinking about? What lessons are you giving? You're obviously very active. You're flying around the world. We keep bumping into you in different continents at the moment. So you're obviously getting these learnings from all these markets. As your merchants start to move into them, how are you educating and working with those merchants around, okay, you guys know the APAC LPM, you know, market very well. This is what you need to be thinking about here. These are how you're going to get the best auth acceptance rates in this market.
Yeah, I think for our merchants, it's about understanding the end consumer, because they're in so many markets. It's very difficult for a merchant to understand 200 different consumer profiles, in 200 different countries. So I think for us as a PSP, our job is, one, yes, it's very easy to advise. Here's the methods that you should be offering at checkout. It's basic. It's payments 101. When you should be offering them, but also what is the flow like? What does your website look like? So it goes beyond payments. I talked earlier about like the types of websites that you see. One of the biggest websites in Hong Kong is something called HKTV Mall, and you log on to this thing. It's hard to navigate. There are multiple pop-ups, multiple drop-downs, lots of pictures, lots of sounds and weird and wonderful things popping out. But it's a hugely successful e-commerce marketplace. That just simply doesn't work in the West, right? In the UK, somebody's reaction to that will be, I think this is a dodgy website, or I'm not sure about this. I don't recognize anything about this, just feels
Creatures
wrong,
of habit,
right? And again, that's exactly. So you have to appeal. Not just, you can stick on, all the payment methods you like, but if they can't find them, or they abandon the website, let alone abandoning the cart. So it's information like that, it's advice like that goes beyond purely just payments. I think is one of the unique things about Oceanpayment, right? We care for our merchants. And of course, they're in it. They've got an advantage, right? They've got a low cost base in terms of manufacturing. The logistics are there. They can ship quickly, efficiently, but they need to present themselves in a right way. And I think that's where we can help them. And sometimes that might mean they need to come off their own platforms that they've built for the Asian market and plug in perhaps to a marketplace or to another e-commerce platform, or enter another ecosystem. And if we have those integrations, of course, we can say, here's what we would recommend. Here's what the UX is, and we're already plugged in, so we'll help you with that.
Do you have quite a big account management team then? Is that a big part of the business?
Yeah. So we, every account management team should be a sales team, right? That's what I always say, like salespeople in disguise, right?
Mic drop.
Yeah. So absolutely, we do. Retention is key. And it's a very, very competitive market, as I mentioned earlier. So retention is really, really important for us. We do we've got two account management functions. One is managing our existing partnerships, and the other is managing our existing merchants. And then there's an overarching operations team as well that see all of that data across both teams. So it's important that we, you spend all of the time and effort winning merchants, winning partners. It's difficult, but it's actually probably the easier part, because you then got to manage those merchants and those partners probably for 3, 4, 5, 6, hopefully many more years. But
how big is the partner ecosystem in that part of the world? Because obviously it's prevalent in the UK, particularly now, that partnership go to market.
Yeah, so it depends on industry. As I mentioned, airline industry, all of the APAC airlines have just built their own systems, right? E-commerce platforms are definitely utilized. Shopify is large. You see Wix used quite a bit. You've still got your Magentos, and so they're present, but not as much as the West. There's not, which is actually beneficial, right, from a PSP perspective, right? One, you're not giving away revenue, and two, you can go and directly integrate with merchants' websites. But there's the balance of, again, it comes back to having a strategy for the domestic market, and that's where we come in and help them with that global strategy. And then maybe two different strategies. Chinese merchants will often run multiple URLs. Sometimes it's a group and it's across multiple MCCs. So again, different approaches for different markets.
Is there an ISO market to a degree out there as well, or not?
There is an ISO market, but we often get approached by acquirers that do we want to enter into an ISO relationship? For us, it's about kind of owning the flows, owning the merchant 100%. So we have a couple of models, but it's not our preferred model. But it's there. It's absolutely there, but not as big as the West.
Amazing. Dan, I was coming to the final part of the show today. We ask our guests to come on and give us and nominate their ick, what they want to banish forever, to bring to the shelf of shame. What would be yours?
So I mentioned it earlier, and I said I would come back to it. The term APMs, an alternative payment method. So we talked about WeChat and Alipay. It's not alternative. It's ubiquitous. Again, Kenya, M-Pesa. So we need to, I think, park that. Let's call it a local payment method. Or even better, let's call it what it is. It's a wallet. Or, you know, I think that the term alternative, it's pretty offensive to somebody who's got a WeChat, got Alipay. It might be alternative to us who sit in the industry, particularly who have worked in card-dominated markets. But I think if we can, I'm happy if we go with local payment method, but alternative needs to be
APM.
Yeah,
I think I was
probably guilty of that a few years ago. And
I do hear you say LPM now. You make a conscious effort. I still forget.
Yeah, I think it's really valid, and I think you can even look at European markets, right? Where like Germany is a great example, where cards was never king in that country, right? So his card's the APM in Germany.
Yeah,
Ideal was an APM for a
Ideal
lot.
is the LPM, right?
Yeah, that was a great one. You don't need to convince me on that.
You could go onto the top website of the top 10 acquirers, and they'll all say cards plus X amount of APMs, when it shouldn't be that. And all the RFPs will say we process ABC LPMs. It shouldn't be that. APMs. It should be the LPMs.
Absolutely.
I do agree. I agree. That is on the shelf.
Great. Get it on the shelf.
Good work.
I'll put it on the shelf happily, yeah.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for coming in today. Where can our guests find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Dan Owens. Please feel free to reach out. If you're entering China, you're entering APAC, come and talk to us. If you're an acquirer, you're a PSP, you're within the fintech ecosystem, come and speak to us. I'll probably be at every single event between now and this time next year, so you will hopefully see me there as well.
We've ever met, just to our listeners.
I do, yeah. My office
has got more air miles than anybody we know.
It's true.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Dan.
Dan.
Thanks so much for your time, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.